Hi, I'm Danger Dan Jers, the host and GM of the D&D Real Play podcast, D&D Dark. Join us on Wednesdays for an absurd, over-the-top comedy horror adventure, starring some of history's most infamous monsters.
I'm Ben Magnet. I play Mary Frankenstein, our barbarian.
I am Daniel Cruz. I am playing Imhotep the Mummy, our cleric.
I'm Jordan, and I play Larry Talbot, a lycanthropic warlock.
I am Grayson, playing Jet Griffin, the Invisible Man, the party's rogue.
I am Aaron. I play the Phantom of the Opera, our bard.
For more information, go to dndarkpodcast.com and listen to us anywhere you find podcasts.
Welcome to Side Quests, your high-octane distraction from all those other podcasts. We're a pen and paper RPG audio show featuring chatter about rules and how to master them, epic world building, player investment, and interviews with the people who make the games you love. Listen in as we trade tabletop war stories, make judgment calls on odd situations, and do absolutely everything we can to give you more RPG resources than you could dream of, all from a simple side quest. My name is Craig, and I have been playing with ghouls.
Ghouls. I'm Rob, and last week I forgot to mention that I did a library thing.
I'm Eli. And what was this library thing?
Okay, so
We spent 5 minutes talking about this beforehand. Here we go. It
is. It's funny. It's all right. So yeah, the library thing I forgot to mention. It totally slipped my mind to bring it up, but I had been looking forward to this, and I was excited about it all summer because I was at the local library before I moved, and they had approached me about running games for their youth program for the fall. So it's both a teaching opportunity to teach kids who are new to Dungeons and Dragons, and specifically, as well as kind of TTRPGs in whole. So the first session we had one kid. One 10-year-old kid. He was super enthralled, super excited. He had been trying to learn D&D by kind of playing with his friends, figuring out the rules, etc., as a group. And it's really funny because when we were talking initially, the first question he asked me is, how do you kind of keep everybody focused at the table? And I had to chuckle a little bit because I said, honestly, that's a problem you're going to have for the rest of your life. If the
kid figures it out, can you share it with us? That's
absolutely. That's exactly what I'm thinking. But he signed up for every single Saturday. I'm doing it bi-weekly for him. Every single Saturday that we have available, scheduled out through November. So every 2 weeks until November, I'm running a game for just this one kid. And as of right now, we have 2 more possibly joining in. And all it takes is one kid in a group of friends, and you start to get the rest of them. That's how we all kind of get the start. So really excited. I want to give more updates as it goes on because I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear how that goes. Kids definitely approach problem solving with some surprising angles. So Tales from the Table on that one should be pretty interesting.
Absolutely. And there's some pieces of advice that I gave him. And Eli, we're going to let you kind of lead us into the topic for today's episode. And some of the things I've given him really play into this. So why don't you take the floor from here?
Today we're going to talk about monsters and homebrewing or changing monsters to suit your needs. I guess that's how from the book do you two play your monsters? Like, when you want an orc, do you just grab an orc and run it? What do you guys do?
When I want an orc, yeah, I'll just grab an orc. If I need something specific, a lot of times I will grab whatever I need, reskin it as what I need. Like if I need something with multiple claw attacks, I'll pull something of appropriate level, reskin it to whatever avatar it needs, use the stat block.
How do you tend to tell the difference between whether something you can? So let's say you're in a scenario and you know that you need a monster of some kind.
Mhm.
What's the deciding factor for you when you're like, well, I could use a minotaur, or you're like, no, I need something more specific. How do you make that call?
So primarily because I'm either playing something specifically Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, um, their stat blocks and their attack system is pretty, I don't want to say universal or standardized, but easy to remember. So when you think about things such as what special attacks or special abilities do what, that's really my base. I think, what can this particular monster do? And instead of building it on the fly, I will just pull whatever else can do that. And rarely do I have to take two monsters and kind of divvy them up Gestalt style. Um, yeah, special attacks or abilities are kind of my deciding factor.
Same question for you, Eli. What do you think? What's your process for figuring out if you know that you need a monster? How do you select what you need or make what you need?
I feel like reskinning monsters is a great way to bring in monsters, like monster profiles or stats you might not otherwise use. Because I think you can't choose, like, whenever you need to default to a humanoid creature, you can't always choose the same stat block. Or
Mhm.
I think one of you two mentioned everything's a bear
Ah,
as
yes.
as a way to reskin. And I feel like you're robbing your players of like a unique experience with having different monsters if every random or every kind of obscure monster has very similar abilities.
I have to defend everything as a bear's honor now. Just so in our prior conversations, the topic came up of when in doubt, just use a bear, which
Mhm.
is it's not make every monster a bear, but the idea is if you're in a corner, you need something. Bear stats generally work. They generally have enough hit points that they're not going to evaporate the instant that any one of the party members, directs their ire toward it. They have a pretty versatile attack setup, usually some kind of variation on claw, bite. The damage is not negligible, but it's enough that they're going to kind of pay attention. And they're pretty durable. You could say, okay, yeah, that's a really tough guy who's he's going to boot you heavily. So there's the bite, and then he's going to swing two axes at you, or something to that effect. More specific stuff is often called for, but that's the philosophy. Is like, are you stuck? Do you need something immediately? Start with a bear, backfill it later on. Because I agree, if everything's literally the same behind the screen, then you are kind of depriving your players of the opportunity to experience untold vistas of horrible things.
Yeah, that feels like an attack, guys. I get what you guys are saying. I don't always use the same. I just look for things that are similar enough. Um, and it's
I,
funny
I
as you're
think
talking.
I
Go
think
ahead.
D&D and Pathfinder do it really pretty well by having the standardized thing because it's really easy to also make monsters.
Yeah,
Because like in that way, I mean everything's pretty codified. Boom, 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 and um, you can build your own stat block.
I want to
yeah.
poke some holes in that. How quick is it? There might be an answer, but if you had to build something completely on the fly, how quick could you do that using the systems that you're talking about? And how married are you to being completely perfect in that assembly?
Oh yeah,
So
I do not think it's a quick assembly for
I
D&D.
I think that I'm sorry. I think that depends on experience. I mean, not just experience, but how well do you know your party? So, for example, if I had to create a monster on the fly, I know just about how many hit points I can give it to be kind of everlasting or as tough as it needs to be. I know kind of a generalized stat number I can keep consistent for saving throws. Um, I mean, I don't have to write it down like you said. I know you said perfect, but to get through a combat, um, if you know your party and experience, you can kind of just throw numbers at your dice and make it up as you go. Um, the problem is that if you forget something, you just say tactics have changed a little bit, or um, keeping it consistent will allow you to at least pull it off like you know what you're doing. And I think the illusion is really that is pulling it off like you know what you're doing.
I think that the nature of this conversation is going to reveal a whole lot that goes on behind the curtain here. So, players
yeah.
listening in, prepare to be terribly disillusioned to see the sausage made here.
Mhm.
Eli, what do you think about it?
I think it does matter up to about like experience is big, but I mean a lot of that might tie into it. But the idea of how much prep time you have, um, and especially for monsters, if you run on a virtual tabletop,
Mhm.
it's really nice to have like because I've put enough prep time on my virtual tabletops in that I have every monster that every monster I've ran across, I've been like, oh, this is a cool monster. I'm gonna add it to like I've got one Roll20 game that just has every monster I've ever encountered, kind of like with stats and then tokenized and uh, in a way that it can be usable at any like I can just drag and drop. So that's kind of spoiled me a little bit.
Now, about your virtual tabletop, because this instantly comes to mind. Does that allow you to create monsters on the fly?
So I've struggled with this when I'm running a game on a virtual tabletop. I use Foundry. I'm Foundry VTT. I'm a big fan of it. I used Roll20. I ended up liking Foundry a little bit more. Um, and what I have found is that even when you set up your virtual tabletop and you say, "Hey, I want to use this particular system," and it says, "Great, here's your pre-set up, NPC cards that can handle monster stats." Um, for perfectly valid issues of copyright, they can't stick in the entire monster book from that setup. You might have entities from an SRD in some case, the most common basic monsters. But often it's like, hey, do you want this thing that certainly exists in the monster book or in the bestiary, but is a little more nuanced? You're going to have to write it up yourself, and that takes time. Um, what I've ended up doing practically is I run a combination of using the tabletop just to represent the tokens because it's trivial to put together. Here's a token, here's the art for it, that's it, and I leave all the data blank. The players aren't checking it. I'm running it off of my own books or my own PDFs or my own notes locally. But we often don't engage with the mechanisms in the virtual tabletop to say, all right, now you click this button that makes your attack roll that automatically deducts HP from here, because it's weird. Despite it's supposed to be despite the intent being that the players can do all the mechanics of the game in the tabletop, it's more effort to set that up every single time you want to use it. So I wing it more often than not. The art ends up being the most important part there.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, as somebody who plays primarily in person, I've got limited experience online. And I remember when Roll20 was just getting started, the whole thing was free. We ended up having to do things like the tokens were essentially just our positions on the map. We ended up doing Skype calls in order to communicate because their audio system was horrible.
It's still not great.
So even with Founder, I mean, I know that the market has really changed, and Eli, all of your prep work going into getting that all set up, that being your thing, my thing in person, Craig, you're able to wing it. That allows three distinct different styles.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we have is not really a consensus to come to at this point. It's just how are we going to wing it? Craig, with yours, it's easy enough because you're still on paper to some degree with art. And so I'm still curious, Eli, if you have to wing it, do you kind of prep the wing first?
Well, I have a heavy coding background, and
Okay.
so working with, and the reason why I use Roll20 is that I've put so much time in writing scripts and APIs and really doing everything I can to personalize the character sheets to
Mhm.
be exactly what I need. So I really enjoy it as a tool, and since I do try to write a lot of like random scripts or treasure generators and stuff like that, I can build that all in. And so when I'm doing my prep in general, I can have Roll20 open, and then I start to do stuff in Roll20 as I'm doing stuff locally, and then it kind of all rolls together.
So I can see that being a real game changer, but Eli, are you at the point where you have like a script that will parse OCR text and eat that and turn it into a JSON and put it into Roll20 directly, or are we not quite that automated yet?
Nothing quite that automated. No.
There's your winter
more
project.
like yeah, yeah. They kind of have that with when you create a compendium for like Roll20, because they basically have a giant Excel sheet and you can just fill in data. So as long as you can fill out an Excel sheet, then that can be ported in. But that involves working on a compendium, which is like more involved with actually the legal, having a license and working with a trademark. So,
And it's necessary to respect trademarks and be respectful of copyright and all that. But on the other hand, there's also a certain amount of all right. I'm not advocating anybody to break the law or disrespect copyright here, but there's just before I even say another single word here. But as people who are running the game, there is a certain practicality to like, all right, what is the most expedient way that I can get the material that's on the book and in my head into the heads of my players? And it's hard to struggle with your tools that are supposed to make your life easier, but they're like, yeah, it's easy if you spend 4 hours ahead of time doing data entry. And it's like, is that a solution, or is that just a different kind of make work? Bridging that gap is the hard part, and when you try to, sometimes the most expedient solutions for bridging that gap end up bumping up against corporate realities, if I can be euphemistic.
Yeah, I fall prey of putting enough time, like putting so much time in Roll20 to like, build everything out that sometimes it can feel like a little bit like of a pressure. Like for a while when I was really into it, like there was a pressure to make sure that everything, like since we had the ability to make everything look really nice, there was a pressure to do that. But I think we've actually enjoyed it more once we started letting go of some of that. And, it is a virtual tabletop. You just got to treat it like that. If you need a scratch piece of paper, draw on it, mark it all up, use it like you'd use a Chessex mat at home.
I found something very, very similar to that. For the past several sessions, I was trying to use and convert maps directly from a PDF that I had of some adventures that I was running. But I was struggling, trying to get this to be the right size and figure out DPI. Well, I guess it's not DPI, but try to convert resolutions and get it right. And then I realized, oh man, I can't use this map. It's got all the secret doors on the thing visible for the players. And it was such a relief to remember that I can just draw a couple of boxes and it's okay to be imperfect. The perfect is the enemy of the good. And as long as you end up with something that's you can use at the table in the moment to have fun, that's the only way you've screwed up is if you're not having fun.
I agree with that. And it's funny. I remember one time I got into a Facebook argument.
No.
Not one of my proudest moments.
What a surprise.
But,
Oh no.
So it's funny because as a gaming company, I manufacture and 3D print things like minis and dungeon terrain, dungeon tiles, and whatnot. But I don't think that necessarily adds anything to the game. I mean, if you want to have it, by all means. If you want to go theater of the mind, by all means. Craig, as you said, having fun is the primary objective with this. And the individual I was heatedly discussing this with felt that anytime you add something to the table, it's inherently better, just because there's something more there. And my position is that regardless of what's there, nothing to the most expensive accoutrement that you can put on the table, it does not inherently make the game better if the players aren't having fun, or if the story sucks, or if your ability to run it is lacking. And that is such a huge issue. And a virtual tabletop eliminating that allows the way to clear that, and then to take it a step farther and do things on the fly. I think kind of brings back that initial feel of why we get into it. I mean, it's easy, fun, quick, whip something up and get down with it. So that's just quick history. Yeah, it's fun is primarily the objective every time we try to run.
And I do think that mechanics still matter. We play these games that have these rules. One of the fastest ways I've ever tried to explain role-playing games, D&D, to normies in my family, just people who have no idea what the hell's going on otherwise. Is okay. We're getting together. We're going to play make believe, but there are some rules to make sure that everyone is making believe the same thing at the same time, and that usually tracks. You can just sit around the fire and tell stories. We've got a great tradition of that as humans, and this is sort of an extension of that in my belief. But I think that the rules are important, not so much because they are valuable in and of themselves, but because they serve as this mechanism to unite everyone's imagination in the moment. Does it matter if a dagger does a d4 or a d6 damage in terms of how much fun you had? No. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But does it matter if the party wizard has one more slot left for a 5th level spell? Well, maybe if it's teleport and everybody's about to be drowned in lava. So with a certain amount of freeform, you sort of lose that. Eli is making wise finger gestures. What do you got, Ben?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just to be consistent.
Yes,
that's what the rules give you, is some consistency, and that's the hardest part about being a game master or a dungeon master, is just trying to be consistent in all your rulings. Because with the more avenues of like the more platforms of knowledge that the players have, the more willing they are to explore the unknown. Be that cool rules or cool things in game, or even just their role playing.
You're describing consistency as a kind of context for them to build understanding?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like if you that's why I think there are so many more fantasy games out there for RPGs than sci-fi games, because when you play a science fiction game, there's always you don't all have the same basis. Not if you're not into as much science, or you don't agree with the world's round. There's all these other things. But in a fantasy game, everyone knows the fantasy setting, so it's just a good foundation.
Because it has to be declared beforehand, because there's not necessarily an obvious default. I mean, there is the default fantasy setting, which is kind of Tolkien pastiche with the serial numbers vigorously rubbed off. But I think you're onto something there. I think that's really solid. The context is what makes people comfortable enough to figure out where their feet are to begin with, and think about what directions they can expand out from there. And if you get way too far away from the consensus of what's going on, players get real grumpy, and I think that's very justified. They get paralyzed. They're like, I don't know what to do because I don't know what's possible or what's given.
And that's something that I think a lot of people end up dealing with when they first get their feet wet with a lot of tabletop games, is that the options are only limited by what they can imagine in most cases. And when you feel that way, I mean, it's like living life. I mean, you're going to wake up and do something. But when you have to make a conscious decision about what your character is going to do, you have no idea, because all of a sudden every possibility seems improbable or overly probable, or just ridiculous at sometimes. And newer players are like, I don't know what I should or should not mention. Like, do I mention that I've gone to the bathroom? Does it important? Does it matter? What order did I get dressed in? Is that something I need to tell my DM? They don't know. So
I think you touch on an interesting subject, that's when people get too comfortable with the rules, they're too much of that, then instead of thinking on the fly and doing doing something impulsive, instead they start thinking via the rules. So I really think it's important to either have characters die every so often, so that you get a new class into the game, so that it can kind of spice things up, or even, I mean, it kind of sucks to lose players, but when you have a circulation, a small circulation of people that are new to the game, or new players into the group, it kind of shakes up what everyone's expectations of what you can do. And then, it's kind of like the weightlifting method, thought of that you plateau if you only do the same thing. And then you have to mix it up to keep getting stronger. Work those RPG muscles.
That That brings a question to mind immediately. How do you feel about something like character trees? I mean, we get to a feasible reason to kind of pause, and your player can bring in a different character to go out on an adventure while his character A kind of takes a break for a minute.
Sorry, I'm not sure I'm familiar with the term you're using. Character trees. What's that concept?
So your players can have 2 to 3 characters. I usually stop at 3 that are played one at a time. So if you get to a village and there's downtime or something, your backup character, your B-lister, your C-lister, etc., by some hand waving is already there. You can swap them out and play with that character to give your primary character a break, or if you're not sure where he wants to go, if you don't know how to develop him at that point, gives you an opportunity to play something different for a little while. And then general rules will usually apply at my table, like their characters cannot hand off loot to each other. They cannot pass it back and forth between themselves via other party members. They can know each other exist by way of mention, but they can't directly interact by any means, even with a medium party member in between. But that opportunity is one player, multiple characters, like branches of a tree. So
It sounds like a technique that's born of, I think, a much older style of playing. That what you've just described sounds like it's the sort of thing that's discussed occasionally in OSR circles about the oldest methods, the sort of stable of characters that players would bring in, and they'd be like, well, today I'm going to bring in my fighter versus, I just have my priest, he's off doing something else. So have you seen a lot of that play in the more modern games that you're running, the Pathfinder stuff, etc.?
when I'm running Pathfinder, I'll usually allow it when things start to get a little stale. Like, hey, let's bring in some other characters. You guys aren't sure what we're doing. With my primary group that I used to play with, we would oftentimes have a character tree, maybe once or twice a year, depending on who was DMing at the time. I don't often see it, but I do see the question about it pop up quite a bit in some of the Facebook or Reddit groups that I lightly follow now. They come across I don't know what I should really do when some of my players aren't having a whole lot of downtime. They kind of want to take a break from their character, but I don't want to kill them. And so I'll usually suggest that, like, hey, start a character tree. Let them bring in another character at the same level. They roll with that one for a while, and kind of give them a quick rundown of the rules I just described for you guys. And seeing it personally outside of me and a handful of other people, not too often.
Any experience on your part, Eli?
I run a similar system. I run one of the more OSR systems where you have proteges. So you have a head character, and then you have like a small stable of characters that are basically your character if you die. So
like retainers or hirelings or something like that?
Yeah, so the game basically, if you don't have a protege and your character dies, you just are a new level 1 character. But with proteges, you kind of have the ability to, like let's say you have 3 proteges, then you have a 3 chances to roll stats for characters. And then as your main character adventures, they can choose to, like, whenever they return from their adventure, they can choose to give away half of their experience to one of their proteges by kind of teaching them.
This is a Hackmaster mechanic?
This is a Hackmaster mechanic.
Okay.
And it's been nice. We like it because the Hackmaster also has pretty long healing times. Like, you can get, like, pull a hammy or get stabbed, and the wound might last for, like, if you don't have magical healing, it might take like a month to heal.
Holy shit.
Of game time.
Yeah.
Or leveling up, like going from level 6 to 7 takes 7 weeks of training. And with characters not all being the same level, you might finish an adventure and 2 people will go off and level up, and they'll introduce one of their proteges, and then the proteges will go off on the adventure with them.
So I have a question of the sort of the practicality of this. So first off, how large is your group on average for your Hackmaster group that you run? How many?
So we've got 6 players, but because we play online and we have a quorum of 4. So if we have 4
Okay.
players, we'll play. So typically we have like that 4 to 5 player range.
So given that, and given the average length of a given campaign that you would run, or a major arc in that campaign that you would run, how often do you see players engaging with this protege mechanic? Because giving away half your experience seems like kind of a big deal. How often does it actually see use at the table?
Well, we've been playing for about 4 years, and
Same general crew?
same general group. We've cycled some. We've one person left, and we've had 2 people join.
Okay.
There are 2 players who do not give any of their experience points to proteges. They only enter, like, if we have less than 4 people, we'll typically play a game, but it'll be just proteges, and we'll just play just like a random side quest and just role play, have fun, do something random. So that's the only way they've been kind of giving their proteges some experience. But we also have some other players that will just dump, like, one player always, every single session, gives half their experience to another. Oh, actually, we have 2 players to do that. They roll up characters, and then they roll up backstories for them as well. So, like, one character, their main character is the brother of their protege, and, like, they're tied together. They escape from the Elven Kingdom together, and so because he mainly thought his main character was just going to die instantly. And so he was like, well,
Of course, it's lasted forever.
Yeah, of course. If he's had a numerous near-death experiences. But
Have you found that the players who are giving away this significant quantity of their experience to their proteges find that they're lagging behind the other players? Or because new characters start at level 1, and that's the assumption, that it ends up being sort of a wash? Because this has been a topic of frequent discussion in my groups of, hey, if we die, we don't do a protege thing, we don't do a hireling thing. Do we come back at level 1? And I wanted to be a hard ass originally on and be like, yes, new characters start at level 1. And I charitably would describe the player's response to that as open revolt, and so we did not do that. So that's why I'm curious, because it seems like you've approached this problem as well, and you had a different experience, or maybe they throw bricks at you. But I'm curious what happened.
we do a thing where if they write a backstory of 1,000 words, they get to go to level 2. So that's kind of an incentive for my players. If they do die, then they can kind of, invest themselves into a character and then still carry on. It's a little bit less rough, but Hackmaster is also a game where a level difference in your class isn't game breaking. So
Okay,
you
the golf. What's the maximum level in the game?
40.
Oh,
Yeah. It's very low fantasy, because it's about every 3 levels of power, or every 3 levels in Hackmaster is about 1 level in D&D.
okay.
Damn.
Yeah,
I got a question.
Yeah.
I got a question about your 1,000 words. How many players ask if they double that they can get another level?
I had someone submit like 20 pages.
Bro.
Oh, God. Oh god, I've had a few like that.
Well,
Because-
okay.
well-
What happened? What happened with that?
So in your Hackmaster game, when you generate a character, at one point you also roll to see how many siblings you have. So they rolled a high number, and they were like, all right, like, I rolled a high number, and my character has a really high charisma so that they can have a lot of proteges. All of my siblings will just be my proteges. So I'm just going to write backstories for this entire adventuring family. And like,
Family circus.
the funniest part is that's the player that I've had go through their most amount of characters. Like, they'd just be like, all right, well, this person just broke their back. All right.
Oh no!
It was funny too, because 2 of their characters ended up retiring because they both like rolled the same really bad fumble, and then both ended up hurting their back. And so he's like,
That just sounds genetic at this point.
yeah, that became the running joke.
That's funny.
I love that story has emerged from this preposterous. So they just wrote like one group backstory, including every member of the adventuring Von Trapp family. Like what?
That's basically what it was. Yeah. There were some of it like it didn't start out at 20 pages, but we played for about a year and a half, and it definitely got that big. So it might have been bigger.
I had to ask my players. I just warned them: do not write me more than a single page of backstory. It's not that I don't want to read that. It's not that I want to discourage your inspiration. But you're going to feel super salty about this if you step on a landmine 20 minutes into the first session.
Mm-hmm.
Write the rest as we play. And you gotta walk that line too. You don't want to discourage them, but you also don't want to get them too married to the characters that they show up with. How about you, Rob? Have you ever had anybody show up with a novella?
Yeah. I'm gonna tell you, this is one of Potato's biggest things, and he once presented me with a 27-page backstory, single-spaced. It was ridiculous. I read the whole thing, by the way. Read the whole damn thing.
Was it good?
It was mixed.
He pauses at great length, inhales deeply.
It's mixed. And so I'm not saying Potato was a bad writer by any means. He had a lot of ideas. His problem was generally cohesion between ideas and a lot of over details where they shouldn't really be because they're irrelevant by all means, which I find to be the general problem with players who present big backstories. And yeah, Potato would end up writing a novella. There'd be whole conversations that he would include with other people. So one of the things I like about super developed backstories is it allows me to develop my worlds a little bit more whole. Like, hey, they kind of name their location. They got some people. I can utilize that if they ever make it back. They may not make it back, but if they do, I can kind of play on that. Again, caveat is the downside. They have an envision for these NPCs, and if I don't match that vision by other means, again, salty, I might be letting them down by some means. But yeah,
if
go
it
ahead.
matters, I try to provide my players not like a template, but like a general gist of how they're, like I said, backstories, but it's more like a character like profile. So I ask for like, describe what they like, paint me a setting with your character in it. Describe, because like in Hackmaster you roll flaws. So tell me how your character got all these flaws. Like, tell me what is their motivation for going out and adventuring, and tell me one fear that your character has. If it's not obvious, because some characters have phobias or they pretty glaring things. And then I think I ask for a goal as well, like overarching big goals, because I try to build an adventure. Like I try to kind of cycle through and have an adventure that's at least generally geared towards one player's character at a time, or at least like that takes advantage of a character's goals. Yeah, more if possible.
It's something that I struggle with actually. Trying to have the desires and the goals of the player's characters woven into the stuff that I'm running. It's easy to get swept up in the moment of, do I have a good adventure that I've either found or that I've written on my own? Is that inherently a high quality thing? Does it have lots of interesting interactable moments? Does it have cool monsters and magic items and spells and just stuff to keep them going? And then suddenly you look up and you're like, oh, I need a reason why they need to care about this. Oh, crap. So, I mean, it's something I'm trying to work on in my own GMing. Have you guys heard of something called knife theory?
I want to say that it's passed through things I've looked at, but I haven't really deep dived into it.
So
only if you're referencing the idea that we need to be knife to each other.
Oh boy. I have started, so we're playing Dungeon Crawl Classics now, and we're using the fleeting luck rules, which is meant to, I swear this is not a terrible tangent. We're using the fleeting luck rules, where at the beginning of every session, the players have a pool of luck points that they can spend to influence rolls. Every time anybody rolls a natural 20, they get another point. You can spend 1 point to influence the result of a die face. But if anybody in the group ever rolls a natural 1, all of it goes away from everybody simultaneously. So spend it while you have it. But one additional change I made to that is if you make a pun that makes me audibly groan, everyone gets an additional point of fleeting luck. And I don't regret that in the slightest. So please enjoy your point of fleeting luck, Eli.
Thanks a lot, Eli.
Huzzah!
If you Google RPG knife theory, you'll come across a Reddit post in the r/D&D subreddit, which is, you can read it through, but it's a fairly simple idea to take away, which is the idea that when you're working on a character's backstory, this is posted by a guy named Jim Baby. I have no idea who this person is, but they wrote this, so there's some quality for you. The idea being that for the character's backstory, you include a number of things that this person called knives, which are specific details, named characters that character cares about. Phobias or traumas, mysteries in their life, an ongoing enemy in their back. And they're called knives because the player crafts them and then hands them to the GM, and they are actionable details from that character's history that they can then use and, in Jim Baby's parlance, stab the player with over and over again. Sorry, stab their character. Don't stab your players. There's laws about that. But the idea carries, right? The more detail, not just detail, actionable, concrete detail you get from a player character, the more levers you can pull as a GM. You don't want an overwhelming, molasses tidal wave of gobbledygook the entire time. Because what are you going to do with the name of their, goldfish when they were 6?
I got that.
Actionable stuff is preferred, and that doesn't have to take up 20 pages. You can fit good stuff like that inside of 1,000 words.
Yeah, it could be bullet pointed, and a lot of things that Eli, like you were talking about. I looked up the knife theory, and I shared it to our group chat here. This condensed version, and they have a good knife block, 7 to 12 different things, like you said, Craig, named person that your character cares about, an enemy your character has, ongoing obligations, and Eli, these were all things that you asked for, and I got to the point after 27 pages. Yeah, I'm like, guys, we need to condense a little bit of this. I need stuff that works. I don't mind having a location named. I don't mind having a few NPCs. But if you develop half of the world hemisphere where you're from, scale it back. I mean, come on. We have other characters, other players to think about. So, yeah, I like the knife theory. And not knowing what it was and knowing that it's where I've headed, it's where I've ended up. Eli, same thing for you. I mean, not knowing about it and still doing it. What is it? Great minds end up thinking alike, right?
When I first heard knife theory and you started talking, I thought you were going to say it's important to pick up a bunch of knives and other equipment. I thought that was the direction it was going, of just like, buy random equipment. And I was going to be like,
Funny.
Yes, please do that. That is what I love it when someone's like, oh yeah, I've got a 5-pound pickle. This can help us in this scenario.
Additional questions.
So,
Okay.
it bleeds for good moments, especially when you forget about them. And then you're like looking in your character sheet in a desperate moment, and you're like, did I mention I've been carrying around a 10-foot ladder this whole time?
That's funny. That's funny. When you mentioned knives and random equipment, it reminded me of a real life thing that I just did earlier today, and I'm not sure why. I left a review on Amazon, which I rarely ever do, by the way. And it was for a 3-sided twisted Damascus knife. And I'm a machinist. So instantly the stupid thing looks like a really fancy drill bit.
Seen this thing. I know the knife you're talking about. It's like the corkscrew.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
You're not taking knife theory too literally now, are you?
It just happens to be a coincidence that we're talking about this the same day I reviewed a very fancy knife, as a machinist who assumed it was a drill bit. So I talk about this in this review. I'm like, it's a horrible drill bit. I don't recommend it. Would never buy it. It cannot put a hole in anything unless it's soft. And for that, I would assume it's definitely better for stabbing than drilling. It's more of a punch, as if I didn't know this was a knife. I'm
Okay.
waiting to hear if this review is approved or not. And like I said, I don't know why
It's
I did
trolling
it. It was,
Amazon reviews.
you know what? Like I said, I never do this shit, and all of a sudden, one just hit me like this would be funny, and I'm hoping. I am
Unsuitable
hoping.
for anything but very soft subjects.
Yes.
I will keep my eye out for you on some,
If it gets
Reddit
published.
repost.
If it gets published, I'll send it to you guys. But I said, I hardly ever do this shit. Oh my god. Every now and then something hits you and you think it's funny and you hope the world does too. I'm hoping, guys.
We didn't talk about monsters at all, did we?
No. Well, a little bit. A little bit.
We touched on it.
Yeah, if we want to go back, I'd like to kind of explain one of the things that I've done before. If you guys
Yeah.
are up for that. Okay.
What do you got?
So I was running a game, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stephen King's novel The Mist, or the movie, but the general premise is that things are shrouded in mist. Mist holds horrible obscenities, monstrosities, alien creatures from different multiple universes. But the idea is that you cannot see because the mist is essentially all-consuming when it comes to your vision. So in the world that I was running, I called it the Mist Fell, and it was very similar. Vision was pretty much restricted to 5 to 10 feet, regardless of what type of vision they had, what sort of lighting that they had. And it was always dark, dreary, rainy mist. Cold, it clung to their bodies. It was absolutely devastating. And to create a monster by any means that was scary in this situation, because I was trying to go for a horror feel, would literally come in like a tentacle, and whatever I needed that tentacle to do would allow that attack. So whether it would be like one tentacle would be a monstrous small snake head or lion head that would allow for a bite attack, or a scorpion tail that would allow for a poison sting attack. And each one was essentially different. And I did that specifically to paint the idea of a alien-like monstrosity that size was just nearly incomprehensible. All of that was just made up on the fly. I just took individual attacks necessary to deliver a specific feel. And the intent of this combat was not to kill my players or have my players win by any means. It was just large animalistic creature passing through their space as it's all attacks of opportunity. And again, to instill fear of the mist, the unknown, the incomprehensible. And that's not something I do too frequently, but in the setting, it just made absolute sense.
How did it land? How did your players interact with it?
They were able to come up because they moved faster than my imagined creature's speed. They were able to find things that resembled legs, and they could at least attack and do damage, which only aggravated the monster. But that their level and the amount of players' action economy was on their side, so I allowed them to make enough attacks to do enough damage that the monster would speed up and flee. They felt a victorious win in that scenario, but they were still scared of further possibilities of more aggressive creatures that they couldn't see. So it did its job. And again, all of it really made up on the fly. The problem is that realistically, there is absolutely no monster, so to speak. There's no body, there's no physicality to it. It's literally a series of attacks described on tentacles. So
Would they? Is there any possibility that they could have killed that creature?
I would have allowed it had combat moved a little farther, but as it stood for that particular encounter, it wasn't designed to die. But again, if they pressed the issue, yes, I would have allowed it.
So your goal was to scare them. I mean, your goal was
Yeah.
to communicate that this place is a terrifying, unknown, unplumbable depth here. I can see some players getting really frustrated by that and saying, well, this is a monster. It's attacking us. We've always been able to interact with this in this kind of way. So what other solutions did you have any other excuse me? Did you have any other solutions in mind aside from chop at it until it goes away or dies that could have been a useful response? Running
Yeah,
away, some banishing ritual. What did you have in mind?
yeah. All of my players know that they can absolutely run away, and I've been playing with my group of
Do they
players.
ever?
Yeah, sometimes,
All
very
right.
rarely, but sometimes. They all know it's an option, especially because a lot of times they know that boss fights essentially they determine when they're going to happen if they're going to pursue that story arc fast enough. But they don't shy away from that. They tend to feel prepared. That's okay. And when we look at something specifically like I don't want to say boss, like mini boss battles, they had the opportunity to run away because I'm not going to hold punches. I'm not going to fudge numbers. I'm not going to try to save them. Um, if it's going to be deadly, it's going to be deadly. And then we have things like story bosses, I'll say. Those are generally things that are personally connected to certain players. And if I need those characters to last and they're outmatching my players, the players will survive because I want something specific to happen. So my players tend to know all these circumstances and they choose how they feel like to react. This was completely new to them. So giving them the opportunity to attack because they're used to that, I allowed them to attack legs. Um, they know that they could spend more time to figure out other ways to defeat a monster. This one was a little different, particularly because there was no real visible aspect to it. They couldn't see it to identify it. They couldn't really get a good handle or grip on a comprehension of size or what it was to kind of pick at it with a knowledge skill or anything like that. All they had to go on was, I see it, I can smash it. And I think with the way that one in particular ended, I looked at elemental spells like fire and mist generally don't get along. Fire comes out on top. So any sort of flame did way more damage. It really was more effective, and that's what hastened the creatures passing through. Um, in the retrospect of scope, I would say that its hit points were massively outnumbering the amount of damage that they would have been able to do in a reasonable amount of time. But
how did you decide like when the creature fled? Was it kind of just going by the feel of the table and how people were like reacting to this? Because it sounds like you were in like initiative order, or
we were in initiative order, and I did that specifically to keep it easy. And prior to the game, I said I'm going to have its base movement at X, and it should take approximately 8 rounds to move all the way through. So I used 8 as my base. They tried to follow it the best they could, so we went to 10. But after that, it was too obscured by the mist, and it continued in its direction. So I don't wing everything here. It's just when something's planned, I'll plan about how long it sticks around. Like I said, 8, we stretched to 10 because they tried to follow. So,
Would you change anything if you were going to run it again?
Yes, absolutely.
So what would you do?
I would actually bring down the size. So I think in terms of like 3rd edition and Pathfinder, we can go all the way up to Colossal now, which is bigger than Gargantuan. And I think 5th edition capped at Gargantuan.
It was medium, large, huge, Gargantuan, Colossal, and Pathfinder, I believe.
Yeah. So a lot of 5th edition players are like, oh shit, there's something bigger. Yeah, there was. And I would actually size it down to something that would be considerably more manageable for the players. But the downside
Why was the size the relevant factor?
Because in my head I'm visioning it's got legs. It's like essentially like a big spider type creature, 8 legs,
Okay.
all different appendages, spaced so far out that finding these things could have been more difficult had I allowed it to be. Scaling that down removes some possible frustrations, but size to scale ratio also removes possible fear, deadliness, unknown aspect to it. So I might have only bumped it down 1, maybe 2, depending on the flow of the game. So I think that's what I would do this time around. And then
interesting. My having heard it and kind of like picturing how you've described it ran, my tendency would actually be to make it even bigger.
Yeah.
Like make it so like it was just the legs moving independently across the map.
That's
And,
what
know,
I was
make-
envisioning
like,
too.
Turn
Yeah.
it less from like, the more puzzle aspect in figuring, but I mean, probably still initiative rounds are probably important for that. Just for running around and with a spider, you could have 8 different initiatives for it, so they can hear different booms as the steps land in the fog.
Yeah, and that's where I started, and it just I didn't fall flat. It got the point across. It did what I wanted it to do, but it wasn't fun to the degree I wanted it. It just missed the mark. So
Sometimes you have to scrap an idea mid-session and just move through it.
yeah, and I think we've all ended up having to do that.
You got to roll with the punches on the fly. If it's not working, you got to adjust. Recognizing when it's time to throw an idea out, even if you're in the middle of it, is a difficult skill to master. But if it's not playing, if your audience, if your players are not singing along, then you're there to have fun, like we said at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, looking at our time, one thing that we wanted to mention was kind of how to end a session.
Ah,
As
How to end a
we're
podcast.
as we're coming to wrap up, I mean, let's shoot for something quick. I mean, what's the best way to do both at one time?
I like, if I can, revealing something that the players are chomping at the bit to go do, and then saying we'll roll initiative next time, or we'll resolve that action when we pick up, so that there's immediately something to get right back into the action as soon as we pick it up. We take notes on what was going to happen. We go from there because it's a great cue for memories of, oh, well, why are we going to do that? Oh, because we were about to do X, Y, and Z. Great, let's get started again. I aim for that whenever I can.
Like that. Eli, how about you?
If you're in incredibly large battles and your time's running short, or you see people aren't all engaging, maybe some people have really stepped away and are kind of like, oh, those 2 people were fighting down that hall. We're just hanging out. You guys can finish it up. Then calling a session in the middle of that fight, right as something changes or something dramatic happens or a really high moment, then you can use that week to prep how to keep and wrap those, especially if you're going to be still in combat. You want to make a way that you can get them into the game.
Yeah.
That way everyone has fun.
Rob, what do you got?
I generally wait for a small little bit of a lull towards the end of the night and say, all right, guys, what we'll do is we'll wrap it up here and we'll pick it up next time. And I think that's what we're going to do for the podcast. So guys, thanks for checking us out. I'm glad you were here for side quests. You can always find us online at epictablegames.com or on Facebook. Look forward to some of the changes we haven't announced yet, and they are coming. Thanks, guys.
Adios.
Bye-bye.